Thank you. Thank you so much for the introduction. I'm very happy to be here and presenting on Philatelic slogans and the 1941 Ecuador-Peru War. I have done an exhibition on this and also explored other slogans from Latin America, but this will only cover Ecuadorian slogans. It will not cover the Peruvian side and the philately that Peru issued during this time because a lot of scholarly work has been done on that already. But I wanted to focus more on the Ecuadorian side because not a lot of focus has been trained on that aspect. So I will begin. So the way this will go is first some background on the conflict, then some of the pre-war slogans and the pre-war philately, the wartime slogans, the post-war slogans, and then the further conflicts that happened afterwards. So I'll begin with the colonial era. So for some background, the Real Audiencia of Quito was established during the colonial era and comprised Ecuador and some parts of Peru, Brazil, and Colombia. So let me just move this. So the map pictured is a representation of that, and um, it was the first real beginnings of the nation state of Ecuador. Um, what's really important to this conflict is the Amazon basin. This was a conflict over the Amazon basin. So both sides claim ownership over the Amazon basin, and both sides claim that the expedition that discovered the Amazon basin in 1541, which was led by Francisco de Orellana, um, happened and was launched from either Quito, which is claimed by Ecuador, or Cusco, which is claimed by Peru. So that's the basis of their claims over the Amazon basin. The Viceroyalty of New Granada, which was comprised of the Real Audiencia of Quito and other audiencias, extended until the Javari River, which is why Ecuador has always claimed initially that its territorial extent was up until the Javari River. In 1822, the New Granada was dissolved and Ecuador became part of Gran Colombia. And when Ecuador was part of Gran Colombia, it signed a treaty with Peru called the Treaty of Guayaquil. And that delineated that the border between Ecuador and Peru was what had once previously been the border between New Granada and the Viceroyalty of Peru, so claiming that the border was the colonial border. So this was a really massive amount of territory and wasn't really viable. It was way too massive, and Peru controlled a lot of it. So upon securing independence, Ecuador signed a different treaty, a protocol called the Mosquera-Pedemonte Protocol, which established the border to follow the Marañón River. So this was less territory than that was established by the Treaty of Guayaquil, but still a lot. It was 60% more than the territory actually held by Ecuador. And the reason why Ecuador didn't hold this territory is because, first of all, Ecuador really didn't have the funds to. And secondly, this territory was really inaccessible. It was quite remote. And of course, it was very resource heavy. It had a lot of petroleum, it had a lot of rubber, but it was really inaccessible and hard for Ecuador. Ecuador didn't really have the funds to access it. So what happened was Ecuador claimed a lot of the land, but didn't really possess it. Peru occupied a lot more of it and had invested economically into it. They had built a lot of roads, a lot of infrastructure. So even though Ecuador had claims over it, they didn't have anything to back that up in terms of people actually living there. So um, this was really surprising to me. From 1830 onwards, there were approximately 34 skirmishes between them. It's a miracle that broader conflict didn't break out before 1941. There were always some diplomatic efforts that stemmed the conflict, but it was always there, the threat of conflict. The Mapasingwe incident sort of illustrates that. In 1857, Ecuador tried to use their land to pay off a debt um, from Great Britain, but they didn't actually possess the land. It was the land that they claimed they had in the Amazon basin. So Peru got quite angry and retaliated by occupying Guayaquil. This illustrates the fact that like even at this time there was a huge difference in the resources between the two countries. It was pretty easy for Peru to occupy Guayaquil, and Ecuador couldn't really do much about it. And so Ecuador was forced to call off the payment plan. This sort of predates the war, but it's really similar. During the war, also, Peru occupied Guayaquil. So this is an early incident that predates the war. So there were attempts at arbitration, first with the Spanish in the late 1800s. Peru and Ecuador signed this convention that recognized the King of Spain as the border arbiter. The King of Spain was an infant at the time, so he couldn't really do much. The negotiations were really protracted. They went on for about 2 decades, up until he was 24 years old. But even after 20 years, 2 decades, the negotiations still failed, and war was barely averted, really narrowly averted. There was further negotiations planned by the US in 1936, and after 2 years, even those failed. So it was really impossible to negotiate between these two parties, and decade after decade, the conflict still lingered, skirmishes happened, and that sort of built up to this conflict. So this is the first philately connected to this war. This is 1936. Argentina releases this map of the continent, and it depicts Ecuador with their borders at their maximum extent, the maximum extent claimed. So Peru was really incensed at the stamp being issued and contacted Argentina and asked them to reissue it, which they did. So afterward, they issued 2 months later this corrected stamp, according to the Peruvians' claims, that didn't have any borders at all, so as to avoid conflict. So another early illustration of Peru's power, um, and the fact that this was a really hot button issue for both countries. So these are contradicting stamps issued by the countries themselves in 1938. So the American negotiation started in 1936, and after 2 years ended in 1938. So the year when the negotiations collapsed, both countries issued stamps that depicted their maps with their conflicting national borders. So publicly, through philately, they were dueling over this, and it was sort of a way for them to publicize the conflict that was brimming. And you can see here the Peruvian stamp is a highway stamp, and the Ecuadorian stamp is just a general map stamp, but both of them can't really exist at the same time. They depict, respectively, their country's largest territorial claims. So this brings us to the first slogan. This is pre-war, but a very interesting cover because this was sent by Charles Hitchcock, who is the president of the Pan American Institute of Geography. So he was a really powerful person in the world of geography. And this is sent to him by Raul Reyes, who was the president of an organization called the Ecuadorian Institute of Studies of the Amazonia. So the slogan on the cover is Ecuador Pais Amazonica. Ecuador is an Amazonian country. They're asserting that Ecuador has ownership over the Amazon basin. That's what lends Ecuador this Amazonian identity, according to them. And the fact that it was sent by Raul Reyes, who was in charge of this organization, specifically aimed at arguing that Ecuador was an Amazonian country, indicates to this American geographer who is in charge of Latin American geography is really interesting, and sort of indicates that perhaps Mr. Reyes was trying to enlist Hitchcock into the Ecuadorian effort to claim the Amazon basin as their own. He was in charge of the geography, and although when I discovered this envelope, there wasn't anything in it, I do suspect that it was probably an attempt to enlist his help. Another interesting fact, there is the seal of the Ecuadorian Ministry of Affairs on the cover, which is really strange. There's also no signs that this has been postally marked, even though the organization, the Institute of the Amazonas, was a non-governmental organization. It still seems that this seal of the Ministry of Affairs was accepted as a free franc. which contest that fact. Perhaps this was a government organization. It seems like it was. So there's a lot of mystery about this organization and why they were mailing this cover to this geographer, and a lot that we don't know that I would like to know. So this is another example of the same slogan being used on a cover. The difference is this was used during the war. To my knowledge, this is the earliest that a slogan was used during the wartime. It was dated July 19th. Hostilities, the war broke out on July 5th. So this was sent 2 weeks after. And the previous cover was sent in June. So, and the slogan was employed starting in June. So, less than a month before the war started, these slogans were already being used by the Ecuadorian government, and of course, they were used during the war as well. Um, so, this is the first example, to my knowledge, of a slogan being used during the war. So, this is a second cover. This is also the same slogan being used on the cover. Um, This is from Ecuador to Arizona. As you can see with the previous two, as well as this one, they're all addressed to America. The trend continues with almost all of the covers. This was a primarily international way of getting attention to the conflict, and enlisting the help of people in America to rally their government to support Ecuador. Um, by this time, August, this was not a good time for the Ecuador military effort, uh, because in July, Peru advanced into Ecuador and occupied the province of El Oro. And around this time in August, Peru was blockading Guayaquil. So this was really the start of Ecuador not doing well in the war. And here you see another instance of the slogan being used. So this is the second slogan. This was used in late August, so sort of after the main chunk of the war. Um, Ecuador's president at the time, President Del Rio, had called a ceasefire in late July, and then afterward, that ceasefire only lasted one day. Afterward, hostilities continued, but Ecuador was losing by this time. So Ecuador knew that they couldn't win this war by military means. They turned to philately to try to influence the outcome. This is a slogan that's aimed at America. They're using words like law and justice, which sort of connects to American idealism, and it's also addressed to America. So this is a clear attempt for Ecuador trying to influence the outcome of the war by trying to appeal to American outside help. And as you can see, there's also this stamp that shows America and Ecuador, and their relationship. So this is a clear attempt to get help from outside. So the third slogan, also addressed to America, this is really clearly aimed at America and mentions America in the slogan. And it also mentions unjust aggression. Again, unjust, a word that will appeal to American idealism. They describe indifference because they feel that America is not helping them out and they should help them out. And of course, this characterization of Ecuador as a victim. There's this theme of injustice, and they feel that America has to intervene by doing something. Importantly, during this time, although America only entered World War II in December of 1941, World War II was still occurring. America really didn't want any unrest in South America to deal with on top of the unrest in Europe. So it's sort of also appealing to that. America doesn't really want another war breaking out at this time. So this is an interesting cover. It's a double slogan cover, so it has two, the previous one and the one before that. So the Amazon and also the America, both are put on here, and this is from September 13th. So the war has really turned against Ecuador. They're not doing well. I think this can be interpreted probably as an act out of desperation. They want to put on as much slogans and propaganda on this cover as is possible to try to appeal to help. Again, this is addressed to a person in America. So this is also a very interesting cover. This is not in my collection. This is given by the courtesy of Mr. Juan Larea for this presentation. This is a cover where it was addressed from Ecuador to Peru, and this is quite rare. Mostly these weren't addressed to Peru, but it ended up in Peru, Lima, and the postal official in Lima, out of frustration, put refuse multiple times on it, sort of socked the Ecuadorian slogan, so you can't even see them. You can barely see the Ecuador País Amazonica. He put refuse on top of them to obscure them, and uh, out of frustration probably, but it's a really interesting piece of history and sort of shows both sides were really frustrated and wanted to end this war. And you could see that Ecuador using a lot of slogans and Peru responding in this way. Both sides really just wanted to end this war. And Mr. Carlos Manuel Larrea, who this letter is addressed to, was a very prominent diplomat and was involved probably in stopping and negotiating an end to the war. So this is the fourth slogan, and it differs from the other ones in that it is a lot more patriotic. It says to serve the fatherland is the most honorable of duties. So it's aimed more at a domestic audience, which is strange because a lot of these slogans are going to an international audience and appealing for outside help. So the fact that it's domestic is very unique and probably why these covers are very rare. The slogan wasn't used very much at all, probably because it wasn't really fitting in with the purpose of these slogans, which was to go outside and appeal to primarily America's help and sympathy. This is the fifth slogan. So this is all of these are from September, and that tells you that Ecuador was really desperate at this point. They were not doing well at all. And it's addressed to America again. It doesn't explicitly mention America, but it mentions continental solidarity. And the only actor who really who has an interest in keeping continental solidarity is America. And they of course, previously had intervened a lot in the continent, so Ecuador hopes they can intervene again in their favor. So it says the conflict disturbs continental solidarity. America would really care about that because it's about to enter World War II and it doesn't want another war breaking out. So this is a variant of an earlier slogan I showed you. This is the third slogan, again addressed to America. This is sent, um, this is a variant of it, so it's completely the same, except for the fact that the Ecuadorian coat of arms has been added to um the slogan. And by this time, October, there was still a little bit of hope for Ecuador, but there wasn't really too much. Ecuador is still trying, though. Even though they've lost on the battlefield, they see this now as sort of their only hope. And they're still issuing different variants and still sending them out, even though they're not doing too well at all. So the Rio Protocol eventually ended the conflict. It was signed by Ecuador and Peru and guaranteed by the United States, Brazil, Argentina, and Chile. And America eventually intervened, but not in the way Ecuador had hoped. They only brought the conflict to an end and allowed the two countries to negotiate. But since Peru occupied the El Oro province and blockaded Guayaquil, they had the upper hand. So the negotiations were tilted in Peru's favor. The protocol was signed, establishing a provisional border and then asking for further surveys to be conducted to determine exactly where the border would be. So this is a picture of the place and where it was negotiated. So these are another example of dueling stamp issues that have to do with something I mentioned earlier, the discovery of the Amazon. 1942 rather, was the 400th anniversary of the discovery of the Amazon. So both countries issued stamps commemorating that and also were careful to make sure that the maps depicted their full territorial claim. So both Peru on the top and Ecuador on the bottom, both of them depict the full territorial claim. And they both posit in the text that the expedition in Peru's case, they claim that it came from Cusco, And in Ecuador's case, they posit that it came from Quito, because wherever it came from, the Amazon basin belongs to. So both claim that the expedition came from their sides of the Amazon. So here we have the sixth slogan. This is the first slogan coined after the war. So even after the war, even after the Rio Protocol, Ecuador is still using these slogans to appeal to outside help. This one is again addressed to the United States and says Ecuador is the apostle of law and watchman of freedom. So again, using words like law and freedom that will appeal to the Americans and their idealism. But at this point, it's far too late. America has already intervened in the way it had wanted to. So there's really nothing much here that's going to change for Ecuador. These are another case of dueling stamp issues, and this contains a separate slogan that we haven't seen before, but that's loosely based on the first slogan. It says Ecuador has been, is, and will be an Amazonian country. So it's the first slogan was also that Ecuador has claim to this Amazon basin. Around this time, this was issued in 1961 for Ecuador, and Peru responded in 1962. In 1960, Ecuador declared the Rio Protocol to be null, so they were quite open now with their claims again. Ecuador issued this stamp with a map of Ecuador with the full claim, and within that map, there is this slogan, this new slogan. Then Peru responds in 1962 with their own stamp series depicting their full territorial extent, even beyond the Rio Protocol, the line established by the Rio Protocol, and has their own slogan, which is the first instance of a Peruvian slogan, and the only instance, really, to my knowledge, that these lands and these rivers have been, are, and will be Peruvian. So this is almost copying the Ecuadorian response, the Ecuadorian approach of including slogans and covers and stamps. And this is the first instance of a slogan appearing inside a stamp. These are not hand stamped, but rather printed onto the stamp. So this is really unique. And then the seventh slogan, which was first employed in 1961, around this time again, and used up until 1963, is Ecuador has been and is and will be an Amazonian country, the same slogan that was in the stamp, but this is just hand stamped onto the cover. And this is the last slogan that was used by Ecuador. So the 60s were really the end point of them using slogans on covers. Beyond that, they never did, but there were further conflicts. So one further conflict was the Paquisha incident. So it was in the 80s, and this was even more short than the 1941 war. It was a conflict centered around this very small post called Paquisha and very brief. So Ecuador did issue stamps, and one of the stamps is at the center of this cover. It's the yellow, blue, and red one, but no slogans. And then lastly, you had the Cenepa War, which was in 1996. And uh, there were many skirmishes between the Cenepa War, the Paquisha War, and the 1941 War. But these were the three times that war broke out. And this was also quite small. It was ended by this Montevideo Declaration that established peace in the long term. So here are stamps from both of them, but notably, they don't have any slogans, they don't have any conflicting maps. At this point, both countries are at full peace and they just want to end hostilities. Both of them commemorate sort of the valor of their soldiers and patriotism, but none of them appeal to outside help. I think that bridge was crossed a long time ago, and both of them turn to each other to sort of sort out the difficulties, even though previously they had been appealing to outside help, outside actors. The solution really lied in their hands. So in 1998, they solved the problem and there weren't any further hostilities. But I think the significance really of the slogans used on covers is the fact that it was almost a public relations campaign conducted through Philately, which is something that you see in other scenarios when it comes to commercial activity, some countries use slogans to advocate for people to buy their products or boost their economy, travel to their economy. But this was a really unique instance where there was a public relations campaign mounted through Philately about a war. So as the war progressed, you saw Ecuador's slogans become much more desperate and their appeals much more frequent. So you saw that as the war progressed, the slogans changed. This is a really unique example where a whole public relations campaign was formed around a war and philately. So thank you very much. Thank you to Mr. Marquez for making sure and Mr. Juan Pablo Aguilar for making sure this happened. And thank you so much for the opportunity to present this. And I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Adi. Great presentation.
Thank you. Yeah, Mr. Wise.
Adi, thank you. Thank you for your presentation. Quite interesting topic, actually. From I am in Mexico, and I sometimes you hear about this topic. This conflicts between borders in South America, and they are rare, and I haven't seen that many slogans, as you say, from this kind. Still, I have several questions for you. The first question is, who applied these slogans? Hand stamped.
Yes.
It was the post office, or it was private, or a combination?
Yeah, this is a question that I've also had. I would like to know whether it was the post offices or it was sort of a private thing. I think it may have been a combination of both because as the variant of the third slogan illustrates, oftentimes it included the seal of Ecuador, the coat of arms. So I think in those cases it was official, but in all the others, oftentimes the font differs. It doesn't seem, also, these were hand stamped by many different post offices, so Quito and Guayaquil. So that may be why the font differs. But it does seem like maybe private actors just motivated out of patriotism may have done this too. But there's no real way of knowing. But uh, I think at least some of them must have been uh, stamped by private actors.
I have another question. In the first slogan that you mentioned with America, could you show that, please? That says
Oh,
America should take care of this, something like that.
uh, let me just bring it up again.
And because there are several slogans, two or three, I guess. It was almost at the beginning. Go back, please. Yeah, yeah. This could be the example of this one.
Yes.
What I want to call your attention, I don't know, because you insisted a lot that when they say America refers to the US. And in most countries in Latin America, when we say America, we refer to the continent, the
Hmm.
Americas, okay? So probably in this case is that what it refers to, the continent. And also something that I remember from the time, those years, also the Organización de Estados Americanos, how do we translate the
OAS.
OAS? Yes, the Americans Organization for the for the Americas, okay? Well,
Organization of
whatever.
American States.
Yes, that one. No, that's why it says Americas, okay? So you need to be careful because this America may refer to the whole continent, not only to the US, okay? I don't know if you have checked that.
Yes, I did not think about that. I mean, it crossed my mind that Americas could mean like the whole continent. I
Yeah,
only thought of it as sort of America, but there were also other powerful actors in South America too, who were also the guaranteers of the Rio Protocol.
mm-hmm.
America was there, but also Brazil was there, so there were other South American actors as well.
Yes.
But I sort of interpreted that way because all of these were addressed to America.
Yeah,
So,
yeah, it could be, but normally when we say America in Latin America, except in the US, okay,
mm,
we refer to the whole continent. Okay, when we refer to the US, Of course, we use America, but not in that sense here, Normally, we say it's Americans, okay, and we refer to the people from the United States, but when we refer to the country, it's very rare that we refer in this context, okay, this way, at least from my perspective and my experience in Latin America. Probably others here could argue that, differently. Another thing I noticed, could you go further to the stamp that you say? Go on, please. No, the stamp that you say it was this one, these two. I have a question for you. This slogan is printed on the stamp
Yes,
in both cases.
yes,
Okay, so it's part of the stamp.
yes.
Oh,
Which
okay,
is the first and only time it happens. So
okay.
it's not like the typical hand stamp slogan. It's
Yes,
printed
yes.
on.
It's printed, so it's part of the stamp. Okay. Yeah, well, it's the slogan inside the stamp, so it is part of the stamp. Okay, it's not an overprint, and it was printed with the stamp. Is
Yes,
that correct? Okay.
yes.
I just
Which
wanted
is
to be sure about that. Okay,
Yeah,
thank you.
which is sort of like a much better way to do it because you don't have to affix the hand stamp separately. It's just on the stamp
Yeah.
already. So
Mm-hmm.
sort of when any ordinary person is using the stamp to send the letter to someone, the
Yes,
slogan
yes.
comes along with it.
I understand. Have you checked the press of those years? Probably they mention in the press in Ecuador, I don't know, because this seems to be a topic that was probably very present in the press in Ecuador. Probably it will be interesting to see the way they express in the press. These slogans that you mentioned, which are quite interesting. I haven't seen this never, elsewhere. Thank you very much for your nice presentation.
Thank you. I haven't seen the press reports, but I think they might lend some deeper
Mm-hmm.
insights into
Mm-hmm.
this.
That's why I'm suggesting that. Yeah.
Mhm.
Thank you.
Thank you.
There is
The
another
student
question there. Paul,
Yes, here. Could you stop sharing, please?
Yes,
Okay. First of all, congratulations for your excellent conference today. I'm very
thank
happy
you.
to hear about other peoples than Ecuador and than Peru listening and studying our stamps and our history. I'm very, very proud of it and congratulations for you.
Thank you.
As always, I am late with some questions today. George made a question or made the appointment about the third slogan that you show in the presentation, that you say that America has to be pay attention about the conflict. It's the same commentary and the same subject that George Weiss just told you. The American government, the Ecuadorian government, wants just to talk about all countries from America, so that they have to pay attention. And you say in your conference that America was coming to the war, to the Second World in the time, 1941. So you was focusing in America. It's not really about that. Ecuador talks America as U.S., not as America. So it's very, very important for the future in your presentations to focus it in that point. This is the only one thing that I would like to say you. Those covers are many covers about that. I in my whole philatelic life, I was trying to avoid that cover because this is a sad history for Ecuadorians. Many people say that yes, the Peruvians were making more development in that place. That's right. But anyway, it's a sadly history for Ecuadorians. And a couple of slogans that you show us, first time I saw it, the last ones are very rare, very rare. I don't know also who is the the person in charge of put that. I don't know that maybe use just the postal office or maybe private hands. And one of those covers were sent from Philatelic that was also a slogan that 5 cents less than the price for the issue. Did you see that? That cover was a publicity for stamps, selling stamps. In the right side say 5 cents less than the face price for the course. This was sent by Philatelic from Ecuador. Maybe in that case the slogan was put by private hands, but I don't know. I'm not pretty sure. The question I would like to know to say why your second name is Esteban. There is any family from South
Yes,
America? Yes.
yes. Half of my family's from Ecuador, which is sort of the connection. And I know some of my ancestors were definitely involved in the conflict, and I think may have even fought in it, but that's not confirmed. But uh, so it's definitely very interconnected with my family's history.
Excellent. Thank you. Keep
Thank
going.
you.
Thank
Thank you.
Will,
Thank you. Ari, thank you. It was a really nice presentation, very informative, very engaging. Man, I'm proud of you.
Thank you.
Congrats. Now I really want to see your exhibit.
Thank you.
I do have a quick question for you though. How scarce are these slogans, especially when compared to the Peruvian counterpart? In other words, how much fight did you have to give when you one of these slogans showed up in eBay or any other auction house?
Yeah, so actually not too much. And I found a lot of the first one I found was sort of randomly, so we'll discount that one. But otherwise, when I actually began to look on the internet, I found them quite readily available on a lot of sites and not too expensive. I don't think many people are sort of interested in this part of postal history, so it was really good for me. I got most of these for like under $5 online and sometimes at shows. And usually they were filed under uh I went to like well organized sites, so I went for the Ecuadorian covers and then found them there. But there were a couple designated websites for postal history uh that sort of charged a markup. I think one of them was Jim Forte. So his covers were a bit more expensive, but he sort of cataloged all the ones from this conflict, so I got some there too. But I made some of them were a bit scarce, like the one I showed you, which was a domestic one that was a bit rare. I think that one is like the only one I've ever been able to find, and that one was a bit expensive. But most of the other ones weren't too expensive and hard to find.
Gotcha. And what about the Peruvian slogans? Is pretty much the same, or is there any difference
Yeah,
price-wise?
pretty much the same. That stamp, the Peruvian stamp wasn't too difficult to get a hold of. It was a bit difficult to get a first day cover. Um, And then, of course, that really nice one that is not in my collection, but in Mr. Larrea's collection, where the Peruvian post office like stamped over the Ecuadorian slogans. That one, of course, is super rare. I think that's the only one I've ever seen.
Gotcha. Thank you, man. Kudos.
Thank you.
Mauricio,
First of all, Adi, thank you for this very interesting presentation. Very, very nice. Well done.
Thank you.
Congrats. As a side comment, on one of your first slides, you mentioned that King Alfonso III of Spain was called originally, he was proposed to be a mediator. Did I got that correct?
Yes.
Okay, just as an interesting fact, well, apparently there were a lot of border disputes in the Americas, in Latin America during his reign, because he was also called to mediate the Honduran and Nicaragua land dispute at the beginning of the 20th century. And he had to rule on that as well. Later on, it was disputed and we almost went to war with Nicaragua over that same issue a couple of years later. The question that I had, well, you already partially answer it. Well, you answered already. My question was, what made you collect this topic? So you answered that you have relatives from Ecuador. It's a really nice exhibit. Sorry, really nice presentation that you show us today. All the history. I was unaware that there was a philatelic part on the conflict, and it's really nice that you had show us this material today.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome. Is a comment on the one of the first stamps that you mentioned that you showed us with the Ecuador and US flag.
Yes.
Yeah, I believe that was not made for gaining support from the US, but we did one as well here in Honduras for the anniversary of the US Constitution. I believe that was a common topic on that year.
Yeah.
So it kind of matches the support, but basically the stamp was for commemorating the US Constitution.
Yeah.
Fun fact with those stamps that they all look alike.
Yeah.
They were all made by the same printer. So
Yeah.
most of them were American banknote, I believe, and they
Yeah.
all have similar aspects. So it's nice to see those stamps, which actually are quite scarce. In the Honduran case, they're quite scarce to find. I don't know if in Ecuador that stamp is scarce, but in our philately, finding a cover with that is hard to find a nice one.
Yeah,
And yeah.
I don't think it's too hard to find in the Ecuadorian case. In my grandmother's stamp album, there were sort of tons of them. So I know that stamp very well, and I know
Yeah.
that it was sort of like earlier and it wasn't for this purpose, but it's sort of interesting that like the person who chose to send it, which maybe lends credence to the idea that the person, the private people were stamping it, that they chose to include that stamp in that cover. But perhaps it's just a coincidence.
And finally, just as that one of the final covers that you showed us, the one that was sent to Peru, where they annulled or canceled the Ecuadorian propaganda. Have you seen more of those
No,
examples?
no, those are super rare. I don't think I've ever seen Mr. Larrea has a really, really rare cover. And I would love to have one if there was one, but there's that I think that's the only one. And I think probably the other ones must have gotten destroyed.
Mhm.
And on the and this goes for all of you here. And from the other going the other way, have anyone seen something similar from Peru to Ecuador with any propaganda that has been annulled by the Ecuadorian post?
I can
Or
answer
no?
that. The answer is yes, but
You have seen. Yeah.
during that time, the rare part of the philately of this period is related to the occupation. So Peruvian stamps used in Ecuador, those are quite difficult to find, and there are tons of slogans related to that. You know, Viva la Frontera Norte, those kind of things. It's more like a support to the troops that were involved. And to the other part, due to the animosity during this time, and it was not only the conflict with Ecuador, Peru also had already the reminiscent conflict with Colombia. So mail between these countries during this period is very difficult to find.
I see. Okay. Thanks.
Thank you.
Welcome.
There is one more person there, Eric. Eric Laser. Here you are.
Hello. Hello, good night. Greetings from Ecuador.
Hi.
Hello.
I was to tell you something about the stand that you show that had the American flag, the United States flags, and the Ecuadorian flag. This was a joint issue between both countries, just like one of the partners just said. That was a joint issue because all America was enjoying the Declaration of Independence from the United States. So it was a joint issue, enjoying it about the declaration. They are not very hard to find here in Ecuador. They're quite easy to find. But the main issue about that one is that you have one with the single flag, one with the two flag, one with just the American flag, and half of the issue was made for Ecuador, and half of the issue was made from United States for Ecuador. Was like a gift from United States to Ecuador. That's a little story about that issue stamps. And one of the main slogans that Ecuador has been using all the time in all the wars across the time, especially that one, that was Ecuador Amazónico. Ecuador Amazónico was the main slogan behind all the publicity about the end and the start to the end of the war.
Yes. Yeah, the Ecuador Amazonico ones are the most easy to find and the cheapest. So, and those were the ones that were most used. I think just because it's simple, direct. All the other ones are quite long and weren't used too frequently. But the Ecuador Amazonico is like sort of the heart of the matter.
Great questions. Any other question for Adi or any other comment? I just have a couple of comments. Oh, go ahead, Luis Fernando.
Nice presentation, Adi. Thank you
Thank
very
you.
much. I got two questions. First, how many pages is your exhibit?
It's a one-frame exhibit, so it's 16.
Okay. Do you have some of them to show here, or can you send some of them to Henry to post?
Yes, I can send the whole exhibit. A lot of the covers that were in the exhibit were in my presentation, but not all of them.
It's okay, but it would be nice seeing the exhibit. And if Henry puts it in our site, that will be nice.
Sure.
Yes, I'd be very happy to.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Great. Adi, just a couple of things. They already touched largely on the scope of the word America, and that's exactly what it is my interpretation as well, especially because here in the US they teach us that there are more than 5 continents, and for us in Latin America there are only 5. So there is always going to be that dispute where you look it from, right? That's one piece. I believe also you mentioned that the only major breakout was in 1941, but in between there were quite a few. And the two of significance in 1858 and 1900. So I always call it in kind of a colloquial way, like good siblings, we've been fighting each other for almost 200 years, right? So that's what happened between Ecuador and Peru. And the other part is related to the usage of the slogan. I do believe, and this would be my assumption, because the same hand stamp is in many different type of covers, not from the same source or the same region or anything. Seems like before they departed, somebody, most likely the post office, was stamping one after the other, making all that happening. If that was the case, probably it's documented somewhere. So maybe that's another research for you in your spare time. I know that you research these things quite a bit, but we, in the name of everyone, on behalf of everybody, we thank you because, you are the future of philately and you represent what we have been very passionate for years. So there is hope that there are good scholars like you. So we thank you.
Thank you so much. On what you said, I would love to go to Ecuador and sort of explore some of the archives there, but sort of what's online is very limited. So I want to definitely explore like the physical documents there.
Sure, and there are a lot of Ecuadorian experts here that you can reach out. You already mentioned Juan Pablo, you have Paul, you have Teddy, very many. So keep those contacts. When you send me your presentation and the exhibit, they are going to be there. So probably you can continue that conversation offline, and hopefully you will add more and more to your exhibit.
Yes, thank you so much.
There are a couple of other hands out there. Jorge.
Sorry, Ali, you mentioned that you have ancestry from Ecuador. Is that true?
Yes.
So how is your prophecy in Spanish?
Sorry.
Your level of Spanish. Do you speak Spanish? At least
No, not
fairly?
well.
So if you want to continue researching in Ecuador or Latin American country, it will be nice if you develop some Spanish skills.
Yes,
You know.
most certainly. And I
Yeah.
forgot to mention that because all of this is in Spanish, so I couldn't read it, but my mom helped me. All
Yeah.
the translations were done by my mom. But
Yeah,
I
that's
have to
good.
learn Spanish.
Yeah. Okay. Congratulations again. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mauricio.
Adi, besides this exhibit, could you tell us in what else are you working now for future exhibits? Any sneak peek you could give us at the moment?
Yes. So after this one, I did this about 2 or 3 years ago. After this one, I started working on another aspect of postal history, still related to slogans, but commercial slogans, South American commercial slogans relating to coffee, tourism, rubber. Ecuador even had sort of like slogans relating to coffee and Panama hats, which are all exports. So the commercial side of these, and I did an exhibit on that, and currently, searching for a different topic, but probably still in the realm of slogans and postal history.
Okay, great. We will love to see that in the future.
Yeah.
As
Sure.
for the information in newspapers, I know that, well, I believe obviously in Ecuador you will find them, but it's easier, I believe, for someone in the US. Try Library of Congress. They should have a copy of everything, and it's closer in your case. So whenever you are in DC, try that will be an excellent resource to see the newspapers of that era, and then you can get other information. Hopefully, there could even be some like official gazettes that might mention if there was a decree authorizing those hand stamps. Could be, I don't know, but maybe some other information unknown or little known so far could be discovered.
Yes. I I I think they're even accessible online, so I should be able to find some of
Yes,
them.
some newspapers have been scanned maybe. So hopefully some information is there.
Yes. Thank you.
Awesome. I don't see any other hand out there. So with that, Adi, thanks again. We appreciate your work on this and very promising.
Thank you.
So thank you for your presentation.
Good luck.
Y el día de mañana.